There is a photograph that changed how the world thinks about Mount Everest. It was taken in May 2019 by a climber named Niramal Purja. In it, a line of climbers stretches across the top of the world in single file, clipped to a fixed rope, waiting their turn to take the final steps to the summit. The queue is so long it disappears into the distance. By some estimates, 200 people are in that line. They are waiting in temperatures of minus 30 degrees Celsius or lower, in winds that can kill exposed skin in minutes, at an altitude where the human body deteriorates with every passing moment, because there are simply too many people trying to reach the same point on the same day. 11 people died on Everest that season. The photograph ran on the front pages of newspapers around the world. And the question it forced is one that mountaineers, guides, and ethicists have been arguing about ever since. How did the world's most dangerous mountain become this? Mount Everest is 8,849 meters above sea level. The air at its summit contains roughly a third of the oxygen available at sea level. Above 8,000 meters, the death zone, the human body cannot acclimatize. The muscles stop repairing themselves. The brain begins to swell. Simple decisions become difficult. Difficult decisions become impossible. Experienced mountaineers have described the death zone as a place where the mind turns against you, where confidence becomes recklessness, where the summit looks close even when you are too exhausted to survive the descent, where the rational voice that says, "turn around," grows quieter with every step upward. In the 1950s, Everest was accessible only to the world's finest mountaineers, people who had spent decades building technical skills, physical conditioning, and high-altitude experience. Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, who reached the summit in 1953, were the product of years of preparation on progressively more demanding peaks. By the 1990s, something had changed. Commercial guiding companies began offering wealthy clients a fully supported path to the summit. Fixed ropes, bottled oxygen, experienced Sherpa guides doing the hardest work, and a price tag ranging from $30,000 to over $100,000. The mountain had not changed. It was exactly as dangerous, exactly as unforgiving, exactly as lethal as it had always been. But for the first time, it was accessible to people who were not mountaineers, people who had never climbed an 8,000-meter peak, people who had, in some cases, never climbed a significant mountain of any kind, and some of them insisted on going anyway. The first story begins with a 9-year-old girl in a helicopter over the Himalayas. Her name was Shreya Shah Chlorfine, and her father had taken her on a tour of the mountains near Kathmandu, where she was born. She looked out at the white peak of Everest, and her father told her it was very difficult for a person to reach the top by foot. She spent the next 24 years thinking about that. By 2012, Shreya was 33 years old and living in Toronto, working as a fashion buyer. She was not a mountaineer. Her training for Everest consisted of running and walking 19 kilometers a day through the streets of urban Toronto with a 20-kilogram pack on her back. She had never scaled a significant peak. Her first real mountaineering experience, in any sense of the word, would be the slopes of Everest itself. She chose her guide company, a startup called Utmost Adventure Trekking, through family connections in Nepal. The company had never guided anyone to the Everest summit before. She paid $40,000. She mortgaged her home to do it. The warning signs were impossible to miss. The most senior Sherpa at Utmost pulled her aside and told her directly she was not ready, that she could kill herself and her guides if she attempted the summit. She did not tell her husband about that conversation. During her acclimatization hike, guides noted her speed with alarm. It took her 7 hours to climb the Lhotse face, 2 hours longer than the mountain's already punishing standard. One journalist who reviewed the documentation of her climb used a phrase that is difficult to improve on. She was a below-average climber attempting the world's most demanding mountain. On the 18th of May, Shreya began her summit push at 7:30 in the evening. 205 climbers were attempting the peak that same weekend, and the traffic was so severe that queues formed at key bottlenecks. The Hillary Step, the narrow ridgeline approaching the summit, forcing climbers to stand and wait in the death zone. Standing still above 8,000 meters is one of the most dangerous things a person can do. Your oxygen depletes, your core temperature drops, your body has no energy to spare. Halfway up, she crossed paths with the director of her guide company. Descending from his own summit attempt, he saw she was nearly out of oxygen. He told her to turn back. She said no. She said she had spent the money. She said her goal was the summit, and she would get there one way or another. He gave her one last bottle of oxygen. She kept climbing. After 22 hours of continuous effort, Shreya Shah Chlorphine reached the summit of Mount Everest at 2:20 in the afternoon on the 19th of May. She spent time at the top. She became the first woman of South Asian origin from Canada to stand on the highest point on Earth. The last photograph of her alive shows her at the summit, a Canadian flag sewn to her shoulder, her eyes the only visible part of her face, and even through the oxygen mask, you can tell she's smiling. She had done the thing her father told her was very difficult, the thing she had dreamed about since she was 9 years old. On her descent, she stopped moving and speaking at around 10 in the evening. She had been climbing for 27 hours. Her oxygen was gone. She died at 8,400 meters. The mountain kept her on the way down. Her husband, who had worried about this, who had been told not to, flew to Nepal to bring her home. He called for tighter controls, for companies to be held accountable for the clients they accept. He said the quiet, terrible thing no one in the industry wanted to hear, that nobody had stepped in and said the words that might have saved her life, that they had left the decision to her, and that she had made the wrong one. Doug Hansen made the wrong decision on a different mountain and a different day, and his story is harder to assign blame to because the wrong decision was shared. Hansen was a postal worker from Kent, Washington, quiet, likable, hardworking. He had trained obsessively on the Cascade Peaks near his home. He was not a fraud, and he was not a fool, but he was not an Everest climber. Not yet. In 1995, Hansen joined Rob Hall's Adventure Consultants team, one of the finest commercial operations on the mountain, and climbed to within 300 feet of the summit. Then the weather turned. Hall called it, turned the team around, brought everyone home alive. Hansen was devastated. The 300 feet sat in him like a splinter he couldn't reach. Hall called him a dozen times from New Zealand, urging him to come back in 1996. Hall liked Hansen. He offered a significant discount. Hansen arrived in Nepal having undergone throat surgery months earlier, still feeling the effects. Hall advised him to rest an extra day before the summit push. On the 10th of May, the Adventure Consultants team began their attempt alongside 3 other expeditions. The plan was clear, a 2 o'clock turnaround time, no exceptions. Everyone had agreed. But by 2 o'clock, Doug Hansen had not yet reached the summit. Hall made a decision. The turnaround time that every guide on the mountain knew was non-negotiable became, for Hansen, negotiable. Hall had watched this man fall short once. He did not want to watch it happen again. That decision cost them both their lives. Hansen summited at around 4:30. Witnesses said he looked exhausted and unsteady, clearly in trouble even at the top. On the descent, the storm arrived. Winds of 130 kilometers per hour, temperatures dropping to -40, visibility gone. Hansen ran out of oxygen on the Hillary Step. He could not move. Hall stayed with him. He could not get him down. At 4:45 in the morning of May 11th, Hall radioed base camp and said simply, "Doug is gone." Hall was too frostbitten to descend on his own. He made one last phone call. A satellite connection patched through to his wife Jan in New Zealand. 6 months pregnant with their first child, he told her he loved her. He told her to name their daughter Sarah. He said, "Sleep well, my sweetheart. Please don't worry too much." Those were his last words. 8 people died in the 1996 disaster. The plaque at Doug Hansen's local post office reads, "Don't give up on your dreams." 10 years before Doug Hansen stood on that mountain, a different kind of error played out in a different season. In 1979, German climber Hannelore Schmatz became the 4th woman to summit Everest. Her husband Gerhard had summited the day before. He came back to camp, looked at the sky, and told Hannelore not to go. The weather was deteriorating. She was determined. She went. She reached the top. On the descent, at 8,300 meters, just 100 meters above Camp 4, their destination, Hannelore and an American climber named Ray Janae began to slow. Their Sherpa guides urged them to keep moving. To rest at this altitude in falling temperatures and rising wind was to risk not waking up. They sat down anyway. The guides stayed as long as they dared. Then, to save their own lives, they left. Janet died in the night. His body was never found. Hannelore pressed on after dawn. Her last recorded words, spoken to her Sherpa, "Water, water." Then she sat down against her backpack. She never stood up. For years afterward, her frozen body sat just above Camp 4, 100 meters from safety, in a seated position, leaning against her pack, eyes open, hair moving in every gust. Norwegian mountaineer Arne Næss Jr., years later, described passing her on his own summit day. He wrote that he could not escape her sinister guard, that she seemed to follow him with her eyes, that her presence reminded him, "We are here on the conditions of the mountain." In 1984, a Nepali police expedition attempted to recover her body. 2 men fell to their deaths in the attempt. The mountain took them too. Eventually, the wind carried Hannelore over the edge and down the Kongshung face. The 100 meters between where she sat down and where she might have lived remained, as it always had, exactly 100 meters. Not every story here ends in death. Some end in something stranger, and in some ways more disturbing. In 1998, a woman named Frances Arsentiev lay in the snow on the north face of Everest for 2 days, while over a dozen climbers passed her. She was alive. She was asking for help. Almost everyone walked past. Frances was an experienced climber from Hawaii, married to legendary Russian mountaineer Sergei Arsentiev, a man who had earned the rare snow leopard designation for summiting all 5 of the Soviet Union's highest peaks. Her ambition to become the first American woman to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen, audacious. Even by elite standards, roughly 95% of all successful summiteers use bottled oxygen. Eliminating it narrows every margin. A mistake that a climber with oxygen might survive becomes, without it, frequently fatal. On the 22nd of May, Frances reached the summit, the first American woman to do so without supplemental oxygen, a genuine achievement. And then the descent began. She and Sergei were exhausted, moving slowly, too far behind the pace required to reach safety before dark. The couple became separated in the night. Sergei made it to camp. When he saw Frances was not there, he gathered what oxygen he had and turned back into the death zone to find her. He was never seen alive again. His body was found the following year, lower on the mountain face. He had died in a fall while searching for her in the dark. On May 23rd, a team of Uzbek climbers found Frances semi-conscious, severely frostbitten, beyond what the mountain would allow anyone to do for her. They tried. They could not move her. They left. The next day, South African climbers Kathy O'Dowd and Ian Woodall found her again, still alive. She looked at them. She said, "Don't leave me. Don't leave me here." They tried to help her. They could not. O'Dowd later said it was the worst decision she ever had to make, that she has never stopped thinking about it. Frances died on the mountain on the 24th of May. Her body lay visible near the summit route for 9 years. In 2007, Ian Woodall returned to Everest specifically to move her. He wrapped her in an American flag. He said it was the least she deserved. Her son Paul was 11 years old when his mother died. He grew up knowing that for 9 years, thousands of people had walked past her body. The mountain had put those climbers in an impossible position. None of them had oxygen to spare. None had the strength to carry her. This is not an excuse. It is simply the reality of a place where the margin between your own survival and someone else's has become so thin that the two cannot exist simultaneously. Which brings us back to the photograph. 200 people in a line waiting. Each had a permit. Each had a dream they had been building toward for years. About half of them, according to one experienced guide who was there, had no business being there. He did not say this cruelly. He said it with the weariness of a man who had watched too many people make decisions at 8,000 meters that they could not have made at sea level. Nepal does not impose meaningful experience requirements for climbing permits. For a fee and a doctor's note, almost anyone can get one. The industry that services these climbers has a financial interest in not turning them away, and the mountain waits. None of the people in these stories were stupid. Shreya Shah Chlorofine was a businesswoman who ran a political campaign and built a life in a country she had arrived in as an immigrant. Doug Hansen worked 2 jobs and trained obsessively and summited one of the hardest mountains on earth, even if it killed him. Hannelore Schmatz had climbed half the world's great peaks. Francis Arsentiev did something almost no one else on the planet could do. The question is not whether they were brave, they were. The question is whether bravery on Everest is enough. The answer, given by the mountain itself again and again across more than 100 years and more than 340 lives, is an unambiguous no. The mountain does not grade on bravery. It does not give partial credit for effort. It does not acknowledge a dream. It only knows physics, oxygen, partial pressure, core body temperature, the number of steps between where you are and where you need to be, and whether your body has enough left to take them. Everest does not belong to the people who climb it. It belongs to the mountain. It has always belonged to the mountain. The people who have stood on its summit, the people who turned back, the people who did not come back at all, they are all, in the end, guests. Some understand that. Some understand it only when it is too late to matter. The mountain, as it always has, keeps its own counsel. It has been there for 60 million years. It will be there long after the last permit is issued and the last dream of standing on the roof of the world has finally, quietly faded. And between now and then, it will keep doing what it has always done. It will take the mountain seriously. It will wait for everyone who does not.